Today we're going to cover a lot of ground in the short time that we have together. We're going to talk about a little bit of history, a little bit of geology, and a whole lot of biology. And so for the next 45 minutes, we're really going to do a job on the Amazon, so buckle to your seatbelts. Here we go. But before we get started, I wanted to point out, on the 7th deck, and the atrium near the starboard exit, is this wonderful chart. You really need to take a look at it. It maps out virtually at least the Amazon up to and including Manaus. And it's in 3 different sections. The top section, this is where we enter, and then you go down to there. And here we've got Santarém and Altar da Chao. And then where this one leaves off, it picks up here and so forth. And then here is Manaus. So take a look at that chart. I think it's going to be very, very interesting for you. But let's start with a little bit of history. The city of El Dorado, the legendary city of gold. It really fascinated the conquistadores. And there were rumors that such a city existed in current day Colombia, Venezuela, Guyana, or northern Brazil. And of course, the conquistadors were motivated by the desire to enrich themselves and find gold. I'll be talking a lot about that in the next lecture tomorrow when we talk about the Inca, and also later in the cruise when we talk about the Aztecs and Cortez. But Spanish conquistadors believed that this legendary city existed. And Gonzalo Pizarro, the younger half-brother of Francisco Pizarro, who conquered the Inca Empire, and one of his deputies, Francisco de Orellana, they set out in 1541 to find this legendary city. And this is a map of their journey. They set out with 340 soldiers and 4,000 natives. They traveled from Guayaquil to Quito, and then they departed that city with this fairly large entourage of soldiers and natives in February of 1541. But you'll notice they didn't get very far. By December of 1541, they'd only gone that far. And they were starving. And many of the Indians had deserted. And it was a total disaster. They were eating their shoe leather, literally. And Pizarro trusted Orellana, and he sent him on ahead to try and find a native village where they would be able to resupply and get food and continue their journey. Well, they didn't anticipate that the flow of the river is so fast. And Orellana was not able to go back. And Orellana sailed all the way to the mouth of the Amazon River. And so he departed December 1541, arrived at the mouth of the river in August. About a 9-month journey, one of the most remarkable serendipitous journeys in the history of the world. So it was really quite an adventure. And along the way, they came to a major joining of rivers together. The Rio Negro and the Rio Solimões came together to form the Amazon River. So above this point, it is not the Amazon River. It is the Rio Negro and the Solimões, actually going back about that far. And of course, this is where modern-day Manaus is. And there it is on the lower left. This is the Rio Negro coming in from the left, and the Solimões coming in from the right. It's called the Meeting of Rivers, and they are so different that they run side by side for about 20 miles before they really become mixed up. This one is loaded with silt from the Andes. This one is much darker and very clear. It's colored by the tannin from the vegetation of the highlands of Venezuela. That's where the Rio Negro comes from. Okay, so he sailed on down, and looks like June, so approximately 6 months after he left Pizarro, he had arrived at this particular location. Now, you might be wondering, how did it get the name Amazon River? Well, Amazons, female warriors in Greek mythology, located in the vast steppes of Eurasia. And there's actually some archaeological evidence that there, in fact, was a tribe that was led by women. And so, okay, all right, so what? How come Amazon River. Well, right here, he ran into a hostile tribe that was led by women. And he had along a scribe by the name of Friar Carvajal. Quite often they had Catholic friars accompanying them to keep track of things. And this is what he said. When the conquistadores carried the fight into the village on the riverbank, they saw there Indian women with bows and arrows who did as much fighting as the Indian men, or even more. And they led on and incited the Indian men to fight, using bows and arrows as sticks, would even drug those who started to flee. They served as captains, commanding these warriors to fight, and placed themselves in the front ranks and held others in position so that they would stand firm in the battle. So that is why it is called the Amazon River, because they encountered this warlike tribe led by women. Well, he continued on and made it to the Atlantic Ocean and was able to return, he and his men were able to return safely to the Spanish Empire. So, the Amazon. I used this slide very briefly yesterday in the Natural Wonders of South America, and in fact the captain mentioned a little bit earlier in the cruise that the 7 next largest rivers in the world, 2 of which are tributaries to the Amazon, the 7 largest rivers in the world, all of their flow, the cubic meters per second that go into the ocean, is less than the Amazon altogether. 8 trillion gallons a day. 8 trillion gallons. It's totally amazing. To really drive it home, 20% of all the fresh water in the world, from any little river or source or creek or whatever flowing into the ocean, enters from the Amazon River. 20% for the entire world. Totally amazing. And in addition, it's the 2nd longest river in the world. It was about 2 years ago, every couple or 3 years, they try and find a source, a headwater source that's a little further than the last one. And 2 years ago, the Mantaro River added 58, when they discovered, they did their analysis, added 58 miles to the length, the known length of the Amazon River, which is just a little, 103 miles or so less than the Nile. So hopefully we'll find a headwater that's a little further than that, and then the Amazon can also be the longest river in the world. But right now, the Nile has that particular reputation. Now the river basin, in other words, the area that drains into the Amazon River covers 40% of South America. It's amazing. Covered many, many different countries: Guyana, Venezuela, Peru, Colombia, Bolivia, Brazil, and so forth. And if you superimpose that map on the map of the United States, it would cover the entire United States. Totally amazing. Now, we take a little journey into geology. This will be just a short side trip. The Cretaceous period, 65 million to 45 million years ago, you'll notice there were no Andes Mountains. There were some highlands right about where we are right now. And in this area of the world, all of the water drained into the Pacific Ocean. If you can imagine that, from probably a little, right where we are, or maybe a little bit further to the west, it all went into the Pacific Ocean. And then the Miocene era, 23 to 5 million years ago, the early Andes rose up, and of course this is because of the movement of tectonic plates. And also something called the Purus Arch, a series of hills, rose up as well. So the water was going in 2 directions. Everything to the east of the arch went into the Atlantic Ocean. Everything to the west of the arch and to the east of the Andes was trapped here. And there was this large sea, a Pebasian Sea, and it was just a large, very deep sea, marshy and deep in places. And so all of the water was trapped here until it rose to such a point that it broke through the arch, and that entire sea drained into the Atlantic Ocean. And this is the entire river basin now. It drains to the east rather than to the west, as it did millions and millions of years ago. So, mouths of the Amazon River, not singular, plural. Because as you can see, there are multiple mouths. The estuary itself is about 150 miles wide. And this morning, my wife got out her little electronic device, and she just found that we were entering, this picture was taken just a few hours ago. We entered right there, as you can imagine. That's where we are right now, at Macapá. Given this amazing amount of water that flows into the ocean, it has sediment from the Andes and all of the lands in the river basin. It has created a sediment cone over 36,000 feet thick. That is sediment. It's the largest delta in the world, far and away. Now, this picture actually was taken on our last Amazon cruise. Out of sight of land, and you notice the color of the water. In fact, from the beginning of time when the Europeans were sailing in these waters, they came across these dark waters, and they thought, this is really quite remarkable. There's no land nearby, and they would dip perhaps a bucket in the water, and it was fresh water. Because fresh water is lighter than salt water, and it goes on top of it. So you can actually taste fresh water out of sight of land. That is how much fresh water flows into the ocean. And here we are. This is the Prince of Dawn, moored at Manaus, 900 miles from the ocean. Can you imagine that? A ship that sails on the ocean can sail 900 miles away from the ocean. And not only that, but in Iquitos, Peru, 2,250 miles from the ocean, even large vessels like this can make it that far. The channel of the Amazon River, at some places hundreds of miles from the ocean, is below sea level. Think about that for a minute. It's actually below sea level, even though it's hundreds of miles from the ocean. So one really interesting phenomenon is called the Pororoca, the Great Roar. A couple of months of the year, this major phenomenon, a tidal war, waves 13 feet high come crashing up the Amazon River. And it's really a great thing if you're a surfer. The record ride, any surfer dudes here? Okay, no? But at any rate, maybe you have some grandchildren. Can you imagine a surfing ride 7.7 miles lasting 37 minutes? It's quite an adventure. Surfers come here from all over the world to experience that. Rainfall. The rainiest months of the year are the first 6. We are in the middle, to the extent that there's a dry season, and I hesitate to call it that, but the driest months of the year are these 3. And we are here in this month, and because it's probably one of the best months of the year in terms of weather, and that's why one of the reasons, I'm sure, why Hal schedules this cruise for the month of November. It's always in the October-November time frame. Average rainfall, 7.5 feet annually. And, well, I need to back up for a minute. With the amount of rain that falls during the rainy season, major flooding occurs. And the flooding spreads out and goes far away from the main channel of the Amazon River. So you can see the water coverage during the dry season, 42,000 square miles. Wet season, 140,000 square miles. And it floods as far as 50 miles from the main channel, up to 30 feet deep. And as we come into these various ports, look at where the city is. It's not down at water level. It's built up. There are large banks. We have to climb up to every river that we will be, to every town that we will be going to on this river, because they can't be down at river level during the dry season because a lot of the year that would be totally inundated. Okay, it floods an area the size of California. And the wildlife that exists in the floodplain area is totally different than the wildlife that exists in the areas that are further out and at higher elevations as well. So that contributes to the diversity of the wildlife in the Amazon River Basin. In terms of temperature, there's more variation from noon to midnight than there is from January to December. There's virtually no variation between the months, but daytime highs 86 to 91, nighttime lows approximately 73 degrees. A lot more variation between these than between the different months of the year. Now, you may be thinking, gosh, this would be a horrible place to live. I can't imagine living in a place that's so hot and so humid and so on and so forth. Take a moment to read this. In August, in these cities, these are the temperatures, and this is the average relative humidity. Digest that for a minute. Jacksonville, Florida, hotter, more humid. New Orleans, hotter, more humid. So if have lived in any of these cities or currently live in them, you are actually experiencing weather, in August anyway, that is more extreme than the weather in the Amazon River Basin area. Okay. Trees, lots and lots of trees. In the virgin rainforest, there are multiple layers. At the very top, 148 to 180 feet above the ground. Not that many trees grow to be that tall, but those are the larger trees. We'll see a picture of a mahogany tree in just a few minutes. It's just absolutely enormous. In the canopy layer, and each one of these is a separate ecosystem. Different species of plants, different species of animals live in each of these different layers. And as you get down, you'll notice the amount of sunlight diminishes significantly, and so consequently the size of the leaves sometimes become much larger as well. And on the actual forest floor, it's a very sterile kind of soil. Not a whole lot of things actually grow on the floor of the forest, but rather in one of the higher layers of the rainforest. But they create the right temperature, sunlight, microhabitats for animals and plants. This is the most common tree in the entire area, the palm tree. There are, I don't mention it here, but the number of species of trees is just enormous. This one is far and away the most common. The mahogany tree, I mentioned a moment ago, here it is. Look at the size of that thing. Goodness gracious, it looks like one of the sequoias almost in Northern California, up to 230 feet tall. But this combination of humidity and warm weather all year long has created a sort of a hothouse environment for evolution of many, many different species. In fact, in northern Peru, researchers have identified 300 different species per 2.5 acres, a world record for tree diversity. Those are different species of trees alone, not saying anything about the other kinds of plants and animals. Now we need to talk about river trees if we're talking about trees. This is the most important tree economically in terms of the history of this region. Early on, mid 19th century, they discovered that if the rubber tree was scoured, a sap would come out, and they were able to, of course, use that sap to create rubber. I think it was around 1850 or thereabouts that vulcanization of rubber was identified and invented. And speaking of inventions, a really big one, in 1888, John Dunlap invented the pneumatic tire, which was used for bicycles and, of course, for cars as they evolved. But it created a huge demand for rubber. And so all of these investors came in from other parts of the world. They saw an opportunity to make a killing. And in fact, they made a ton of money, these rubber, not robber barons, but rubber barons. Between 1880 and 1900, it was just an enormously lucrative kind of business to be in. And it was that money that funded the building of the Manaus Opera House. By the way, you can't come to Manaus without going to an opera house. Just, you can actually walk in and take a tour. It's not that expensive. It is absolutely magnificent. The first performance, Enrico Caruso in 1897. But unfortunately, in 1909, synthetic rubber was invented. And the rubber boom crashed. And the opera house was closed, I think something like 1924. So it really wasn't in operation all that long. But it has been restored, and it is absolutely magnificent. You have to see it. Now, let's talk about biology a little bit. Biodiversity. These are different kinds of organisms. Primates, 77 species. This is within the Amazon River Basin. #1 in the world in terms of a particular region. And you can go in and read the rest of the chart, 3,000, plus 3,000 species of fish, #1, 524 species of mammals, #1, and so on and so forth. More than a third of all animal species live in the Amazon rainforest. So this is really a remarkably rich area for different kinds of species of animals. So let's take a look at a few of them. 524 species. The apex predator is the jaguar, the third largest feline in the world after the lion and the tiger. And there's no question that one's at the top of the food pyramid. Everything else is a potential meal for the jaguar. The tapir is the largest land mammal in South America, 500 pounds or so. The capybara, 200 pounds, the largest rodent in the world. So this is related to mice and rats and so forth. And the sloth is really an interesting animal. Moves very, very slowly. It's a microhabitat for all kinds of insects and algae and fungus. A lot of different critters live in the fur of that animal. And in fact, that sloth would fit in really well here on a cruise ship, because 2/3 of the body weight of a well-fed sloth is the contents of its stomach. So it fit right in here on the cruise ship, I think. But they're sort of ugly-looking animals, but I guess every species, if you find a young enough one, it was sort of cute. And so that one was sort of cute for me. Some other mammals, giant anteater, peccary, wild pigs that run in packs, sort of dangerous. You won't be seeing any of them, don't worry. The coati mundi, a raccoon-like animal. Again, it runs in packs, but these have become so domesticated that in many tourist locations, they'll be coming out of the forest to get a handout from you. They're very, very friendly and not dangerous at all. And the agouti, now I have a confession to make. All of these pictures I got off the internet. This one was taken on Devil's Island just a couple of days ago. Did you see the agoutis? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, well, of course they live in the Amazon rainforest as well. And I thought, hey, we need to update the lecture to get the agouti in. It's a much smaller kind of a rodent. River mammals. Oh my gosh, the pink dolphin is sort of the icon of the Amazon River. A few years back, its survival was threatened because a lot of the people were catching them and eating them. But you will, I hope, be able to see pink dolphins as well as gray dolphins. And my wife is refreshing our memory. The last time we were here, when we were docked at Santarém and Altar de Chao, if you look carefully, no? Okay.
Boca de Valeria.
Boca de Valeria, thank you. San Raymond, Boca de Valeria. And so if you look carefully, look for a pink. They don't come totally out of the water like that one. They just sort of breach the surface a little bit. And I don't know, maybe there's a fish market nearby that the waste gets into the water, but those seem to be some very good areas in order to see the pink dolphin. The giant river otter, which is actually the longest member of the otter family. It's about 5.5 feet long. It's just really huge. And monkeys. The capuchin monkey, I think that's named after Capuchin monks who sort of, I guess the cap on top, and I don't know. At least I believe that's what it is. This guy looks oriental, I guess, Emperor Tamarin. A squirrel monkey. Marmosets are so cute, they're about the size of your hand. Spider monkeys. You know, I'm not an expert in monkey identification, but I think the monkeys on Devil's Island look a lot like the spider monkey. So unless there's a spider monkey expert in the room, we'll just say that those were spider monkeys. And then the howler monkey. Oh my goodness, these things are really quite remarkable. Let's see if we can get one to say something to us. By the way, they hold the Guinness Book of Records for the loudest noise made by a land-based mammal. So let's see, I don't know, hopefully we can get this to work. And audio-visual person, if you'll turn it up for us, we'll get the full effect. Okay, that's enough. I have a brother-in-law who can mimic howler monkeys. And in fact, I think he's a little bit related, if you know what I mean. We were in Costa Rica, and we heard the howler monkeys far away. They're all over Central and South America. And he started projecting that sound. And they started coming closer and closer. I think he was actually communicating with them. Okay, snakes, oh my goodness. 468 species, oh gosh. The largest snake in the world, anaconda, weigh up to 550 pounds. They live in the water. Their nose and their eyes are on the very top of their head so that they can swim right along the water. Of course, they go after some of the larger animals. Boa constrictor, a whole lot smaller, but still it takes its prey by constricting. Coral snake, very, very dangerous. The bushmaster is the largest venomous snake in all of the Western Hemisphere. In Panama, where I grew up, we used to call them the two-step. You get bitten, you take 2 steps, and that's the end. Very, very venomous. Very venomous. Don't worry, folks, you're not going to see any of these, unless you go to a zoo, possibly. And, as you might imagine, there are crocodiles. They call them caiman in this part of the world. It's the largest predator in the Amazon ecosystem, 16 to 20 feet in length when they are at full maturity. Now, what then happens when the apex predator, a jaguar, meets an immature caiman? Who do you think is going to win? The jaguar. He is, after all, the apex, the top of the food pyramid. Birds. 1,652 species. There are so many species I can only pick and choose just 2 or 3 or 4. The scarlet macaw is sort of the icon for Brazil and for South America. Just magnificent colors. The hyacinth macaw is the largest flying parrot, much larger than all of the other species of parrots. The harpy eagle is the largest flying predator in South America. The Jambiru stork is the tallest bird in South and Central America. It's about 5 feet tall, and its wingspread is only exceeded by the condor. So this is a very, very large bird. Amphibians, a lot of species of amphibians, different kinds of frogs. A word about the poison dart frogs. They are very, very small, about this size, very, very colorful, a lot of different species, and even though they're called poison dart frogs, there are only 4 of those 175 species that have the poisonous skin that is used by the indigenous tribes to poison their darts. But they aren't even used that much for that. Oh goodness, what was the name of that? Curare. Curare is a plant poison. They use that a whole lot more than the secretions of the skin of the poison dart frog. But they do use that for hunting because they could shoot a dart and immobilize a monkey or whatever they shot the dart at. Oh, a quick word. Amphibians all around the world are being extinguished. They are being annihilated by habitat destruction, pollution, climate destruction. But the worst thing of all is a very insidious disease called the chytrid fungus. And in some countries, there are no more frogs anymore. Fortunately, around the world, there are places, sanctuaries for frogs that have been created. And they're very, very sterile. They are trying to reproduce the frogs. And hopefully, maybe in time, the fungus will go away, or at least they'll be able to breed a frog, species of frogs that are resistant to that fungus. This picture, by the way, was taken in the Amazon exhibit at the Smithsonian National Zoo in Washington, D.C. And there are a lot of those little poison dart frogs in there, but it's sort of hard to see in that picture. A lot of fish, 3,000 plus species. The Arapaima is the largest by far, 15 feet, 220 pounds. Those can no longer be killed, or at least it's against the law to kill them. They were so popular because if you ever caught one of those fish, it would feed your family for weeks. And so consequently, it's been outlawed, the fishing of that particular kind of fish. The electric eel, 600 volts. It uses its electricity to stun its prey, to discourage predators, and to attract the opposite sex. Because apparently the more electricity it has, the more attractive it is to potential mate. Vampire fish, I have no idea where it got that name from. Freshwater stingrays, about 120 different species of stingrays. Interestingly, many of them, in fact most of those species, are related to stingrays in the Pacific Ocean. Remember back to the geology? That's really a confirmation that in fact all of the water went into the Pacific Ocean at some point. Oh, and we can't leave this topic of fish without talking about the piranha. The piranha really need a better public relations firm working for them. You know, they have this reputation of being absolutely vicious and attacking in packs and so forth. Well, recent studies have indicated they're actually a very shy fish. They swim in schools in order to discourage predators. They are actually, as one person pointed out, they're actually very nice fish with large teeth. But that's not to say that in some isolated cases there have been tragedies. In 2015, a young 6-year-old girl felt her canoe was capsized. Her grandmother was taking her to some kind of a celebration at capsized, and she was killed by piranha. But that's really quite exceptional. So, and by the way, you need to go to some of these fish markets. There's usually there's a fish market near the dock in Manaus. I don't know about Santarém, but if you go to those fish markets, you'll be able to see a lot of these different species of fish. Insects, 30% of the whole biomass of the rainforest. Let me tell you a little something about the bullet ant. It's sort of a remarkable ant in some respects. In 1984, an entomologist named Justin O. Schmidt decided to take one for the team and let a lot of bees and ants and wasps sting him, rating the level of ouchiness. This sounds like a really scientific survey. But I tell you what, I would not volunteer for this one. On a scale of 1 to 4. By the way, bees were number 2, to give you sort of an idea. He published his Schmidt Pain Index in 1984. And the bullet ant was 4.0 plus. Remember, a scale of 1 to 4? And this is how he described it. Pure, intense, brilliant pain, like walking over flaming charcoal with a 3-inch nail in your heel. In the eastern Amazon, some tribes use these ants in initiation rituals as a rite of passage for young men. And that pain lasts for more than 24 hours, I understand. Wow, my goodness gracious. The leafcutter ant, they have been studied a great deal, and they have the most complex social system other than mankind. Of all of the different species of insects and animals in the world, the most complex social system. The lanternfly, it sort of it has this unique marking which I think scares off predators. And there's a myth among the Indian tribes that if a lanternfly bites you, you have to have sex within 24 hours or you will die. Now, coincidentally, they don't bite. Now, I wonder where that rumor started. Who can figure that one out? The Titan beetle is the largest beetle in the world, 6.5 inches long. And you can see that is a really large one. And we need to talk about spiders, too. Again, folks, don't get worried. Where you're going, you probably won't see, well, hopefully you'll see some leafcutter ants anyway. The wandering spider, the world's most venomous spider. I was doing a little research online and I came across this. World's deadliest spider discovered in Britain inside a box of Tesco bananas. So those of you in Great Britain, if you get a box of bananas, check it out carefully. You want to be very, very careful. And then one of the largest spiders in the world, a leg span of 1 foot, the Goliath bird eater. I guess it eats birds. My goodness. Butterflies. Look at those colors. Absolutely beautiful. Now, they turn the lights off on the top decks as we go up the Amazon. Why do they do that? Because they don't want to be a magnet for all of the insects. Nonetheless, in the morning, if you get up before they clean the decks off, you will find this. This is what my wife took on our last trip up the Amazon. Walking around the deck, you'll find all kinds of really interesting insects. By the way, those of you who have balcony cabins, you do not want to have your cabin open with your lights on at night, unless you want some uninvited visitors to come see you. So please close your doors. Oh, by the way, a friend of ours who had taken many Amazon cruises told me this story. He was walking the decks early in the morning, and he saw a terribly frightened officer with a vampire bat that had landed on the ship. Now, they're not that big. And he was scared to death. He was the size of a football player, but he was not about to touch that bat. So he recruited one of the Indonesian officials, one of these very small people to come take care of the bat. He wasn't going to touch it with a 10-foot pole. No way. All these hundreds and thousands of species, and yet they're still being discovered today. 381 new species in a 2-year study. 2,500 new species in another study. My goodness. There's just so much about the rainforest that is still being discovered. But unfortunately, it's under major, major threat. This is a picture showing the deforestation in red. 20% of the Amazon rainforest has been destroyed. And here's the Amazon River, and you'll notice right alongside of the banks of the river, is a lot of red. And so consequently, you're not going to see virgin rainforest for the most part as we sail along. Now, why is the forest being destroyed? This sort of indicates that 64% is agriculture. Brazilian soybeans they've discovered within the last decade or two that this is a great place to grow soybeans. And now they're up to 30% of the entire production in the world, the second largest for any country in the world. So when you see agricultural fields as we sail through and do our various trips, it's probably soybeans. And the next largest is the logging industry, 18%. Fuel wood, people have to cook their food, and that would be 10%. And let's see, and then finally, cattle ranches are 8%. And so a road gets built, and the loggers come along, and then come the folks who want to plant, and so they have to burn away the underbrush, and the forest is transformed in a very dramatic and tragic way. Hydroelectric dams. More and more of the tributaries leading into the Amazon are being dammed. This is a developing country. They're looking for non-polluting sources of electricity. They have a lot of rivers. They are building dams. And so the blue are under construction or in operation. This is from a couple of years ago. And the yellow are planned. But this really has a major impact on the local ecology. A lot of land gets flooded. It just really changes the whole environment. Climate change, as you can imagine. In fact, a higher concentration of carbon dioxide, which is, that's one of the major causes of climate change, cause trees to grow faster and die sooner. And as the captain mentioned, they are the lungs of the planet. 20% of the Earth's oxygen is produced by the Amazon rainforest. As well, it's also a source of many medicines as well. I see leukemia, Parkinson's disease, birth control, malaria, glaucoma, local anesthetic, and there are so many other medications and pharmaceuticals yet to be discovered. Hopefully we'll be able to discover them and use them for the benefit of mankind before they are destroyed. Indigenous tribes, there are many. The Yanomami are the most famous, the most numerous. They have the largest area in a tropical area of any tribe. Oops, my wife is giving me the sign. Okay, I'm going to try and wrap this up pretty quickly. So these are some of the tribes, and the Jivaro, perhaps that name rings a bell with you. They were known in the as I remember as a young man growing up in the 1950s, they were known for hunting heads and shrinking them. And so that was sort of something they've been trying to live down ever since, I guess. Uncontacted tribes, there are about 50 of them. These are tribes that have had no contact with, quote, civilization. And therefore, they are protected by the government to the extent that they can be, because they're very, very vulnerable to diseases, to exploitation. But miners and foresters, loggers are encroaching on their territory, and in fact, this is a headline from 2 months ago. These primitive people, in this particular instance, were killed by people who wanted to mine their land. And just another quick word on the Amazonian exhibit at the National Zoo in Washington, D.C. If you're ever in the D.C. area, I suggest going by there. It's absolutely phenomenal. These are pictures that I took, that my wife took, actually, within the Amazonia exhibit. It's the next best thing to coming to Brazil. And that's the end of our lecture today. Thank you for coming.